Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling from inside a kit of resin tank busters, and today we are covering the heavy support options for Alpha Legion. So before we get into the rankings, I'm just going to go over sort of a quick breakdown. This is going to be similar to my other rankings, so it's just my thoughts, and of course lists like this are somewhat subjective. And I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on it as well once, in the comments once you watch the video. I am splitting them into 3 tiers as per usual, from weakest to strongest. Now the tiers aren't ordered specifically, they're all in tier 3, they're all I consider them equal. The way they appear in this video is not how I'd rank them from worst to best. And this is considering Alpha Legion buffs and their abilities, though how Alpha Legion works, a lot of these sort of have to hold their own in Alpha Legion as they don't get any super specific buffs to vehicles. So let's get into it. Starting up, we have the Predator Destructor, which is the autocannon variant, and as with most things, it benefits from a Warpsmith. However, with no real Alpha Legion specific buffs, this leaves this, I think it's a classic tank. It's quite weak, and I think not even it can work, I just don't think it works. Its autocannon does have nice flat 3 damage, which is great in the era of Terminators, but AP 1 and 2d3 shots, I think it's too random. The AP isn't high enough to make those shots super threatening, and there isn't enough of them to stack saves. So, and sort of the last nail in the coffin, not only do I think the sponsons and the pintle-mounted weapons just aren't very good options, for some reason it's 10 points more expensive than the better version, which we'll cover later in the video. Overall, I think the Predator Destructor is just, pathetically weak. It just doesn't seem, even in Iron Warriors, I don't think it has any place in the army. Other options outshoot it pretty easily. And then next up, we have the Defiler. Even though I love this model, I don't think it's a particularly great choice. It's a sort of, as I say here, a jack of all trades, but a master of none. Packing some decent firepower with its battle cannon, or not battle cannon, I think it's technically a demolisher cannon with its profile. It packs those big meaty claws, the cannon, it can take the Scourge for extra attacks, and of course can pack a variety of different weapons that can make it a relatively threatening perspective on the board. And I could have put this guy in tier 2, however, I feel that other units sort of do what it does, but better, as we're going to cover in the next slides. It is just not as good as the other demon engines that do its specific roles. This thing does shooting and melee, but you can get cheaper demon engines that do shooting and melee better than this thing does each one combined. Speaking of, we're moving on to tier 2, we have the Forgefiend. It's pretty cheap as far as firepower goes with the ectoplasma cannons, which is what I'd run it with. I believe it's 155 points for 3 of them. And again, in the age of Terminators, flat damage 3 is always very useful. Its guns are decently long range at 36 inches. This guy can easily sit back outside the 18 inches, which is where it gets its buff, as it has more wounds than 9. It can just sort of plink away with Strength 7, AP 3, and flat damage 3, which means it's a credible threat to most things. Light vehicles, it can obviously do a lot of damage to them. Infantry aren't going to like it. With 3 of them, you are getting 3d3 shots with blast, which means it can clear out infantry relatively efficiently, I'd say. So, but even at this, I do think that other fire support options can outperform it, especially in Alpha Legion, where this thing isn't core, nor is it, I believe it can't get many psychic buffs, except for, I believe, Prescience. And obviously it benefits from a Warpsmith. Everything here does. But I think the Warpsmith is better suited with other vehicles, which we'll get onto here soon. Speaking of one of them, the Maulerfiend. I think for its weight class at 150 points with the Tendrils, which I'd always take, it's actually pretty efficient melee. With 6 damage D3 plus 3 attacks, with 6 damage 1 attacks, it can actually maul things pretty efficiently. It can tangle with heavy targets with obviously D3 plus 3, and then once you've killed quite a few things with that, if something's surviving on 1 wound, you have 6 of those Lasher Tendrils, which can easily finish off an enemy. And it's just quite a generalist profile, having both heavy hitting and horde clearing possibilities. Because with the Lasher Tendril, this thing has 12 attacks. It's faster than its shooting cousin at 10-inch movement, which isn't bad. And comparing this thing to the Defiler, which was a couple slides ago, these things actually have pretty much the same defensive profile, but with 2 less wounds. But you pay a little less, so you get a little less wounds. But they have a 3+ save and a 5+ invul. They regen the 1 wound and can obviously be repaired. So I think this guy could be a pretty credible threat if you want just sort of a melee beat stick to advance with the army. And if you want a Warpsmith to come with him, I think that's completely viable. Because this guy's going to be regenerating, I think, on average 3 wounds a turn, which means that if they don't kill this thing, it could easily be getting back up its brackets. And of course, it's going to be hitting very accurately with a +1 to hit buff from the Warpsmith. But that's just my thoughts on how I'd personally run a Maulerfiend, as I did get Eldritch Omens. That was sort of the start to my Eldar army and buffing up my Chaos army. So I obviously have one of these that I need to build, and I was thinking on how I'd run it, and I'd definitely run it as a Maulerfiend personally. Next up is the Predator Annihilator, which is the las cannon variant of the Predator chassis, obviously. It's pretty decent. It's similar to the Forgefiend, but it's more slanted towards pure anti-tank / anti-character damage, as its heavy 2 las cannons are strength 9, AP 3, and damage d6 +2, which means that characters of most weight classes could be killed by this thing with relative ease. I think it's just kind of a simple unit, though. 130 points. You keep it in the backfield, have it sit on an objective, maybe, and just have it plinking away with those 2 las cannon shots every turn. And I mean, if you say clear out why can't I think? A character's bodyguards with, say, some shooting from Terminators, just for example, then this thing could just rip into that character with 2 massive damage shots, which I think is quite reasonable. However, I think the sponsons are pretty bad. 10 points for a heavy bolter is not good, and 20 points for a las cannon, definitely not good. I don't know why they didn't make the sponson las cannons the Soul Shatter las cannons, which are the fancy new upgraded ones. I think if they did, I'd definitely take them. Having 4 of those las cannons just firing away. But regardless, that's just, conjecture, whatever you want to call it. I think the Predator Annihilator can do plenty of work, and since its las cannons are 48-inch range, this thing can easily sit more than 18 inches back, getting the full benefit of the Alpha Legion trait. Which not all of these can. Well, certain ones, I'd say the Maulerfiend, I forgot to mention this, it does really benefit from being able to fall back and charge, obviously, because it's a melee beat stick, so it can fall back and then let your army shoot into the target and then charge something else. But yeah, I think the Predator Annihilator is very strong, well, not very strong, but a reasonable choice if you just want some tough anti-tank firepower from the back of the army. Now, we have the Chaos Land Raider up next, and the new Land Raider is certainly much better than before, with its toughness 9, 2+ save, and it means that a lot of popular anti-tank weapons, like multi-meltas or the various lances for the Eldar, are a lot less effective, usually being strength 8. The buff las cannons certainly make its damage a lot more consistent against most targets. However, its main issue is units to transport. Transporting 5 Terminators or Possessed I don't think is at all worth it. And a squad of 10 Chosen, which this thing can transport rather easily, is only 250 points, as I don't think any of its points upgrades are very worth it. So 250 points in a 265 Land Raider. It's a reasonable transport, but I'd rather just get 10 more Chosen. And I will say I've realized something while recording. I forgot to add in the slide for the Vindicator, but I'd put the Vindicator in this tier as well, being quite tough with that Siege Shield. And Armor of Contempt, it's reducing incoming AP by 2, and it's just quite good, I'd say. And its Demolisher Siege Cannon is quite powerful, so it's, again, a high tier 2 pick. I think the Vindicator is actually quite a good advancing, tank if you want that. Though, again, it's if you need a tank like that, it fills the role quite well. Anyways, we are on to tier 1, and we're starting with the Havocs. The Havocs are pretty much, I'd say, the favored child of the heavy weapon infantry, like Retributors or Devastators, or Dark Reapers as well, because these guys got to keep their move and shoot for no penalty buff, or not buff, like a datasheet effect. They got their second wound and no real points upgrade, because their special weapons are either free or very cheap. I'm a like, I think their best ones are probably the autocannons, which are buffed. I'll explain in a second. The las cannons or the chain cannons. The autocannons are strength 7, AP 2, and damage 2, which is quite nice. It's just a generally good profile against most infantry. It can even be decent against Space Marines, as normal size Space Marines are going to be saving on 4s, which is good, but I mean, that could still kill quite a few of them at flat damage too. The las cannon is obviously your classic anti-tank damage, dealing d6 damage, strength 9, standard stuff. And then the chain cannons are just amazing for clearing infantry. Even a single one of them is heavy 8, strength 5, AP 1, damage 1. More than enough to kill plenty of things. And being toughness 5 with 2 wounds and 3+ saves mean they can be reasonably tough, especially with the Alpha Legion -1 to hit at greater than 12 inches away. And of course, these guys are the only core option on the list, and that means they are able to obviously deep strike deny. What are the other things? That's the main one, is deep strike denial. And they can obviously they can be marked. For example, mark of Zinch could be good on these guys to intercept a unit that deep strikes. And they can obviously get more buffs from characters, like rerolls from Lords, or not Apostles, Exalted Champions. Though they can benefit from Dark Apostle buffs, but I think there's better targets for those. These guys also would benefit from something like Prescience, from a stray psychic power if you have one to go, but if you don't, there's plenty fine on their own. And I think Havocs are quite a strong choice. I think they do heavy firepower very well. They can get very tough in cover, especially in Alpha Legion with the -1 to hit. And of course, they can actually be surprisingly mobile for heavy weapons units, because again, they got to keep their move and shoot for no penalty. And next up are the Obliterators, featuring my own Obliterator. They fill a similar role to Havocs, though with 3 profiles they can flex into different roles more easily. For example, if you need to clear hordes, they have their d6 +9, strength 5, AP 1, damage 1. If you need to clear damage to infantry, they have their sort of autocannon profile, strength 7, AP 2, damage 2. Then cracking tanks, they obviously have their strength 9, AP 3, damage 4, I believe is the last profile. And that profile can obviously deal with tanks quite efficiently. Though they aren't core, which means their buffs are a little more limited, and means they're not quite as buffable, except from the Master of Possessions. And if you're going to be running them, I think using a Master of Possession with them is quite reasonable. It could be quite a powerful combo, I think. So that about wraps up this video. These tiers, as I said, these tiers aren't in specific order. I don't think Obliterators are necessarily better than Havocs. That's just how I made the slides. Same thing with the rest of the tiers, though I would say the autocannon Predator is the worst heavy support option. I didn't review the Forge World choices. Some of them might be worse. But again, this is generally my first impressions. I'm obviously going to use some of these guys in games, and I'm going to experiment with them, and I may do a revised version of these videos later once I have more competitive experience, going to big tournaments like LVO and stuff like that. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.